Captain Jake Morrison stared at the navigation display with growing concern. The numbers made no sense. According to the computer, they were somewhere impossible. 40,000 light-years from Earth, deep in uncharted space. The experimental jump drive had worked, but not the way anyone expected. "Lisa, tell me you've got some good news," Jake said to his navigation officer. Lisa Carter looked up from her console, her face pale. "Sorry, Captain. We're definitely not where we're supposed to be. The star patterns don't match anything in our database. We're completely lost." The bridge of the UES Wanderer felt smaller than usual. Jake's crew of 12 had signed up for humanity's first deep space exploration mission, expecting to map systems just beyond the Kuiper Belt. Instead, they had jumped farther than any human had ever traveled. "Ryan, how's our ship holding up?" Jake asked his chief engineer. Ryan Brooks wiped grease from his hands with a rag. "The jump drive is fried. Whatever happened during that malfunction, we're not jumping anywhere soon. But the ship is solid. We can survive out here for months if needed." Dr. Amanda Pierce, their xenobiologist, was studying the sensor readings. "Captain, you need to see this. We're picking up artificial signals, lots of them. This area is heavily populated." Before Jake could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Lisa's hands flew over her controls. "Captain, we've got company, big company. I'm reading hundreds of ships ahead of us, and they're fighting each other." On the main screen, space lit up with energy beams and explosions. Massive warships, each one larger than any human vessel, exchanged devastating fire. The battle was unlike anything humanity had ever imagined. Ships the size of cities trading blows that could vaporize mountains. "We need to get out of here," Ryan said, stating what everyone was thinking. "Can't," Lisa reported. "We jumped right into the middle of it. Those ships are all around us." Jake watched the battle unfold. Two distinct fleets faced each other. One group of ships was sleek and silver, while the others were rougher, more varied in design. The silver ships seemed to be winning, their formation tight and disciplined. "Unknown vessel. Identify yourself immediately or be destroyed." The voice came through their communications system, speaking perfect English. Everyone on the bridge froze. Jake had expected many things from humanity's first contact with aliens, but perfect English wasn't one of them. "How are they speaking our language?" Amanda whispered. "Universal translator, maybe?" Ryan suggested. Jake activated the communication system. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel UES Wanderer. We're explorers, not combatants. We request safe passage." "Earth vessel, there is no record of Earth in Imperial databases. You will surrender immediately for processing." The silver ships were clearly the ones making demands. Jake looked at his crew. They were explorers and scientists, not soldiers. Their ship had no weapons beyond basic defensive systems. But something in the alien's tone bothered him. The word processing sounded ominous. "We're not surrendering to anyone," Jake said calmly. "We're peaceful explorers who got lost. All we want is to go home." Silence filled the communication channel. Around them, the battle was ending as the rougher ships retreated or were destroyed. The Silver Fleet was regrouping, and several of their largest vessels were moving toward the Wanderer. "Did you just refuse a surrender demand from the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet?" The alien voice sounded shocked. "I guess I did," Jake replied. "We're not your enemy, but we're not your prisoners either. I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge." Lisa was monitoring the approaching ships. "Captain, those vessels are massive. The largest one is over 2 kilometers long. Our entire ship could fit in their shuttle bay." Ryan was checking their systems. "Our shields are holding, but these readings don't make sense. It's like their energy weapons are designed for much weaker defenses. Our basic shields are actually deflecting their scanning beams." Amanda was recording everything. "This is incredible. First contact with an advanced alien civilization. And they have some kind of galactic government. The historical significance is enormous." More ships surrounded them, but none fired. Jake found that curious. If they wanted to destroy the Wanderer, they clearly had the firepower to do it instantly. "Captain Morrison?" The alien voice returned, now sounding more formal. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. Your vessel's technology is unknown to us. Your refusal to surrender is also unknown to us. You will be brought aboard my flagship for questioning. Will we be treated as diplomatic representatives? Jake asked. Another pause. I do not understand this term in this context. You are representatives of nothing we recognize. Jake looked at his crew. Lisa was monitoring the alien ships, Ryan was keeping their systems running, and Amanda was documenting everything. They were a long way from home with no way back, surrounded by a military force that could destroy them without effort. But they were still human, and humans didn't give up easily. Admiral Kethvar, we represent humanity and the nation of Earth. We're explorers and scientists. We mean no harm to you or your people, but we won't be treated as prisoners. If you want to talk, we'll talk. But as equals. The word equals seemed to break something in the communication. Several long minutes passed before Admiral Kethvar responded. Your ship will be tractored aboard our vessel. Resist, and you will be destroyed. Comply, and you will be questioned. There are no other options. Jake felt the ship shudder as invisible. Forces grabbed hold of the Wanderer. Through the view screen, he watched as they were drawn toward the massive alien flagship. The ship was beautiful in a cold, military way, all clean lines and gleaming metal. Well, crew, Jake said. Looks like we're about to make first contact the hard way. Remember, we're explorers representing all of humanity. Let's try not to start an interstellar war on our first day. Lisa managed a nervous laugh. No pressure. Right, Captain? As the Wanderer was pulled into the alien ship's hangar bay, Jake wondered what they were getting into. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet, which suggested a large organized civilization. They spoke of processing and questioning, which didn't sound friendly. But they hadn't simply destroyed the human ship, which gave him hope. The hangar bay was enormous, filled with smaller craft and busy with activity. Alien figures moved around in what looked like environmental suits, preparing for their arrival. Jake took a deep breath and prepared to meet humanity's first aliens. Whatever happened next would change everything for his species. He just hoped they were ready for it. The Zephyrian flagship's hangar bay was larger than most buildings on Earth. Jake Morrison and his crew stood at the bottom of their ship's ramp, facing dozens of armed aliens in sleek armor. The Zephyrians were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Their movements were precise and coordinated like a military drill. I am Admiral Kethvar, said the figure at the front of the group. He was taller than the others, with elaborate markings on his armor. You will follow me for questioning. Jake stepped forward, his crew behind him. I'm Captain Jake Morrison. These are my officers, Lisa Carter, Ryan Brooks, and Dr. Amanda Pierce. We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you. The Admiral's large eyes blinked slowly. It was clear he had expected a different response. Several of the armed guards exchanged glances. You will address me as Admiral Kethvar, Supreme Commander of the 5th Imperial Fleet, the alien said formally. Sure thing, Admiral, Jake replied with a friendly nod. Should I call you Admiral Kethvar, or is Kethvar fine? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Ryan Brooks stepped closer to Jake, noticing how the guards had tensed at Jake's casual tone. You will follow proper protocol, Admiral Kethvar said slowly. Lesser species show appropriate respect to Imperial authority. Lesser species? Amanda Pierce spoke up, her voice sharp with curiosity rather than anger. What do you mean by that? The Admiral studied her with those large, dark eyes. Your species is unknown. Your technology is primitive. Therefore, you are lesser. This is the natural order. Ryan couldn't help himself. Your natural order sounds pretty convenient for you guys. More uncomfortable silence. The guards were definitely nervous now, their weapons held tighter. But Admiral Kethvar seemed more puzzled than angry. You show no fear, he observed. This is unusual. Lisa Carter looked around at the massive hangar, the armed guards, and the alien technology far beyond human understanding. Oh, we're scared, she said honestly. But being scared doesn't mean we have to act scared. They were led through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. The ceilings were impossibly high, the walls covered with images of conquest and submission. Alien beings of various species worked throughout the ship, all of them keeping their heads down when Imperial officers passed. Jake noticed that these other species moved differently than the Zephyrians. Their postures were hunched, submissive. When a Zephyrian spoke to them, they immediately stopped what they were doing and listened with obvious fear. "How many species are in your empire?" Amanda asked as they walked. "The empire encompasses 47 conquered species across 15,000 worlds," Admiral Kethvar replied with obvious pride. "We have brought order to chaos, strength to weakness." "Conquered?" Jake's voice was carefully neutral. "So these other species didn't join willingly?" The Admiral stopped walking and turned to face him. "Willingly? This concept is irrelevant. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the way of the universe." Ryan looked at a group of small, furry aliens cleaning the corridor. They had immediately pressed themselves against the wall when the Admiral approached, trembling with obvious terror. "Doesn't look like they're having much fun," Ryan muttered. "Fun?" Admiral Kethavar repeated the word like it was foreign. "They serve the Empire. They have purpose. What more could lesser beings require?" The briefing room was another exercise in intimidation. The table was massive, the chairs sized for Zephyrians, forcing the humans to sit awkwardly. Holographic displays showed star maps of Imperial territory, vast beyond human imagination. "Your ship appeared in the middle of a military operation," Admiral Kethvar began. "Our sensors cannot identify your technology. Your behavior is unlike any species we have encountered. Explain." Jake leaned forward, trying to get comfortable in the oversized chair. "We're explorers from a planet called Earth. We were testing a new drive system and ended up here by accident. We've never seen aliens before today. Impossible. All species in this region have been cataloged and conquered." "Well, you missed us," Lisa said with a slight smile. "Earth is pretty far from here." Dr. Amanda Pierce had been studying the holographic displays. "Your empire is incredible. The coordination required to manage 15,000 worlds must be extraordinary. How do you handle the cultural differences between so many species?" Admiral Kethavar looked confused by the question. "Cultural differences are eliminated. All serve the Empire in the same manner." "You mean you destroy their cultures?" Amanda's voice was shocked. "We bring order," the Admiral corrected. "Chaos serves no purpose." Ryan had been examining the room's technology. Without asking permission, he stood up and walked to one of the control panels. "Interesting power distribution system. Mind if I take a look?" Several guards raised their weapons, but Admiral Kethvar held up a hand to stop them. He was watching Ryan with fascination. "You show no deference to Imperial authority," the Admiral said. "You ask questions as equals. You ignore protocols. This behavior should result in immediate punishment." "Why?" Jake asked simply. "Because," the Admiral paused as if the question itself was difficult to understand. "Because you are lesser beings." "Says who?" Lisa asked. Admiral Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. "Says the Empire. Says the natural order. Says 2,000 years of Imperial rule." Amanda leaned forward in her chair. "But what if you're wrong? What if there isn't a natural hierarchy? What if different doesn't mean lesser?" The room fell silent, except for the hum of the ship's systems. The guards were looking at each other uncertainly. Admiral Kethavar was staring at the humans as if seeing them for the first time. "Your questions are dangerous," he said finally. "Dangerous to who?" Jake asked. Before the Admiral could answer, an alarm began sounding throughout the ship. A junior officer hurried into the room and whispered something in Admiral Kethavar's ear. The Admiral's expression darkened. "We have received reports from across the fleet," he announced. "Word of your arrival is spreading through the ship. Other species are asking questions about your behavior. Some are refusing to show proper submission gestures." Ryan grinned. "Sounds like your natural order might not be as natural as you thought." Admiral Kethvar stood abruptly. "You will be confined to quarters while I decide what to do with you. Your influence on Imperial order is unacceptable." As they were led away, Jake could see alien workers throughout the ship watching them with curious eyes. For the first time in what was probably years, These conquered beings were seeing someone treat their imperial masters as equals. "Captain," Amanda whispered, "I think we might have accidentally started something." Jake nodded grimly. They were just 4 humans, lost and far from home. But somehow, just by being themselves, they had challenged an empire that had stood for 2,000 years. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a very dangerous thing. Probably both, he thought, as they were locked in their quarters. Definitely both. Their quarters were luxurious by most standards, but felt like a prison to the human crew. Jake Morrison paced near the large viewport that showed the stars streaming past as Admiral Kethvar's fleet traveled toward the imperial capital. They had been confined for 3 days with only brief visits from guards bringing food. "Captain, you need to see this," Lisa Carter called from the room's communication console. She had been trying to understand the ship's information networks. Jake joined her along with Ryan Brooks and Dr. Amanda Pierce. On the screen was what looked like a news broadcast, showing images of their ship and crew. "Can you understand what they're saying?" Jake asked. Amanda nodded, having worked with the universal translator. "It's about us. They're calling us the fearless ones and saying we come from beyond the known galaxy. But listen to this part." The broadcast switched to show other alien species throughout the Imperial fleet. Instead of the hunched, submissive postures they had seen before, some were standing straighter, looking directly at the cameras. "They're talking about equality," Amanda translated. "Some are asking why they have to bow to Zephyrian officers. Others want to know more about Earth and human customs." Ryan laughed grimly. "We've been here 3 days and we're already causing trouble." Before anyone could respond, their door opened. Admiral Kethvar entered with 2 guards looking troubled. "You will come with me," he said. "There is a situation requiring your expertise." They were led to the ship's engineering section, where a crowd of aliens worked frantically around a massive power core. The air was filled with warning alarms and the smell of overheated metal. "Our primary power coupling has failed," Admiral Kethvar explained. "Repairs will take days using standard procedures. The fleet cannot wait." Ryan stepped forward to examine the problem, ignoring the armed guards. "This is a pretty simple fix, actually. You've got a feedback loop in your distribution grid, see this?" He pointed to a series of conduits. "All you need to do is reroute power through these secondary lines while you recalibrate the primary system." The Zephyrian chief engineer, a thin alien with intricate tattoos covering his arms, looked skeptical. "The secondary system cannot handle primary power loads. Imperial regulations forbid such modifications." "Your regulations are wrong," Ryan said bluntly, then caught himself. "I mean, they might work for normal situations, but this isn't normal. Sometimes you have to improvise." Admiral Kethvar watched as Ryan began making adjustments to the power system, working alongside alien engineers who seemed amazed by his unconventional approach. Within an hour, the power core was running smoothly again. "This should not work," the chief engineer muttered, staring at his displays. "But efficiency is up 12%. "Sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones," Ryan replied, cleaning, his hands on a rag. "Your people are good engineers. They just needed permission to think outside the regulations." Meanwhile, Dr. Amanda Pierce had been invited to the ship's medical bay to examine an injured alien from the recent battle. She found herself working alongside doctors from several different species, all of whom seemed nervous about treating patients from outside their own kind. "Why are you afraid to help?" Amanda asked a reptilian doctor who was hesitating to treat a mammalian patient. "It is not permitted," the doctor replied. "Each species has designated medical personnel for their own kind." Amanda looked at the injured alien who was clearly in pain. "That's ridiculous. Medicine is medicine. Pain is pain. Help me figure out their physiology and we can treat them together." For the next several hours, Amanda worked with alien doctors, sharing human medical knowledge while learning about xenobiology in practice. The collaborative approach yielded better results than anyone expected. Captain Jake Morrison found himself in an unexpected situation when Admiral Kethvar invited him to the officers' mess hall. The meal was awkward, with Zephyrian officers clearly uncomfortable eating with a lesser being. "Your species fascinates me," Admiral Kethvar said during the meal. "You show no fear, No submission, yet no aggression. This combination is unknown. In Imperial records, "We're just being ourselves," Jake replied, trying the strange alien food. "Not bad, by the way. What is this?" "A delicacy from the Corvin homeworld. We conquered them 60 years ago." The Admiral said this casually, as if discussing the weather. Jake set down his fork. "What happened to the Corvin people?" "They serve the Empire now. Their resistance was dealt with." "How many died?" Admiral Kethvar looked surprised by the question. "I do not recall the exact numbers. Why does this matter?" Jake studied the alien Admiral's face. "It matters because those were people. Individuals with families, dreams, hopes. They mattered. They were obstacles to Imperial expansion. Their resistance made their fate necessary." "No," Jake said quietly. "It didn't. There are always other choices." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the corridor outside. Through the mess hall's windows, they could see a crowd of various alien species gathered around Lisa, Carter, who was apparently telling them stories about Earth. "Your navigation officer is attracting attention," Admiral Kethvar observed with disapproval. Jake watched as Lisa demonstrated something that made the crowd laugh. Actual laughter from beings who had looked terrified just days earlier. "She's just being friendly. Humans are social creatures. She is disrupting order. These beings should be working, not listening to stories. When do they get time to rest? To enjoy themselves?" Admiral Kethvar stared at him. "Rest periods are scheduled. Enjoyment is not required for function." "But it's required for living," Jake said. "What's the point of existing if you can't enjoy it?" Later that evening, the 4 humans were gathered in their quarters when Admiral Kethvar arrived alone, without guards. This was unusual enough that they all paid attention. "I have been monitoring communications throughout the fleet," he said without preamble. "Your presence has created unprecedented disruption. Productivity in some sections has increased, but discipline has decreased. Beings are asking questions that have not been asked in centuries." Amanda leaned forward. "What kind of questions?" "They ask why some species rule while others serve. They ask about dignity and worth. They ask if there might be alternatives to Imperial order." The Admiral sounded genuinely troubled. "These questions threaten everything the Empire has built." Ryan crossed his arms. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. The Empire has brought peace to the galaxy. Before Imperial rule, there was constant warfare between species. And now there's just constant oppression," Lisa said. "That's not really better." Admiral Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. "You believe there is another way?" Jake nodded slowly. "We believe every thinking being deserves respect and dignity. We believe cooperation works better than domination. We believe strength should protect others, not control them. These beliefs, they are not natural laws? They're choices," Jake replied. "Hard choices sometimes, but they're still choices." The Admiral stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Tomorrow we reach Zephyros Prime, the Imperial capital. The Supreme Overlord will decide your fate. I fear your ideas are too dangerous to be allowed to spread." After he left, the 4 humans sat in contemplative silence. "We might have bitten off more than we can chew," Ryan said finally. Amanda nodded grimly. "We wanted to explore strange new worlds. We just didn't expect to accidentally challenge an entire galactic empire." Jake looked out at the stars rushing past. Somewhere out there was Earth, home to billions of humans who had no idea their representatives were about to face the ruler of 15,000 worlds. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "we stay true to who we are." Zephyros Prime was a world of impossible architecture. From the viewport of their shuttle, Captain Jake Morrison and his crew could see towers that stretched into the clouds, connected by bridges that spanned kilometers. The entire planet seemed to be one massive city, a monument to Imperial power. "Impressive," Ryan Brooks admitted, despite everything. "You have to give them credit for ambition." Admiral Kethvar, who was escorting them to the surface, nodded with obvious pride. "The capital represents the greatest achievement in galactic history. Beings from across the Empire come here to witness Imperial glory." Dr. Amanda Pierce was recording everything with her portable scanner. How many people live here? 70 billion beings call Zephyros Prime home. They represent every species in the Empire. Lisa Carter looked down at the massive urban landscape. Do they live here by choice? The Admiral paused before answering. They serve the Empire in whatever capacity brings the greatest order. Their shuttle landed at a facility that was clearly designed to overwhelm visitors. The landing bay was larger than most human cities, filled with ships from across the galaxy. Alien beings of dozens of different species moved through the space, all wearing identifying markers that showed their status within Imperial hierarchy. The lower castes wear blue markers, Admiral Kethavar explained as they walked. Middle castes wear green. Only Zephyrians wear gold, indicating ruling status. Jake noticed that the blue-marked beings kept their heads down and moved quickly out of the way when anyone with higher status approached. The fear was obvious and heartbreaking. What happens if someone doesn't wear their marker? He asked. Such defiance would result in immediate correction and increased surveillance. They were led through corridors lined with statues of Zephyrian conquerors and holographic displays showing Imperial victories. Everything was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. But Jake noticed something the Admiral probably hadn't intended him to see. Groups of alien beings were gathered, in small clusters whispering among themselves. When they saw the human delegation pass, many of them straightened up slightly and watched with obvious curiosity. Word had spread even here, to the heart of the Empire. The Supreme Overlord's throne room was a masterpiece of intimidation. The Bai chamber was vast enough to hold a small city, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The throne itself sat at the end of a long walkway, elevated high above the floor. Thousands of beings of various species lined the walls, all watching in silence. Supreme Overlord Vexthul was larger than other Zephyrians, his skin a deeper blue and marked with elaborate tattoos that seemed to move in the light. His throne was made from what looked like crystallized energy, pulsing with inner light. "Approach," commanded a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake and his crew walked down the long approach to the throne, their footsteps echoing in the enormous space. Jake made a point of walking normally, not hurrying or showing the submissive posture that was clearly expected. "I am Supreme Overlord Vexthul, ruler of the Galactic Empire, master of 15,000 worlds, commander of 47 species." The Overlord's voice was deep and commanding. "You are the beings called humans." "That's right," Jake replied in a normal speaking voice that somehow carried clearly through the chamber. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison, representing humanity and the planet Earth." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Apparently, most beings spoke much more quietly in the presence of the Supreme Overlord. "You were found in Imperial space without permission. Your technology is unknown. Your behavior is unprecedented. Standard protocol demands you submit to Imperial authority or face destruction." Jake looked up at the towering figure on the throne. "We choose neither option. We'd like to establish formal diplomatic relations between our species as equals." The silence that followed was absolute. For several long moments, no one in the vast chamber moved or spoke. Supreme Overlord Vexthul stared down at the small human delegation as if they had spoken in an unknown language. "Equals?" the Overlord finally repeated. "This concept has no meaning in Imperial law." "Then maybe your law needs updating." "Lisa," Carter said calmly. More murmurs from the crowd, louder this time. Jake could see shock on alien faces throughout the chamber. Amanda Pierce stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we've learned a lot about your empire during our time here. It's an impressive achievement, but we think there might be room for improvement." "Improvement?" The Overlord's voice carried a dangerous edge. Ryan Brooks joined the conversation. "Yeah, like maybe treating everyone with basic dignity. We've seen how scared people are here. That's not really necessary for good government." Supreme Overlord Vexthul rose from his throne, his massive form casting a shadow over the humans below. "You dare to criticize Imperial order? You suggest that beings who have conquered the galaxy should take advice from primitives?" "We're not primitives," Jake said firmly. "We're different, and different doesn't mean lesser. The Overlord descended from his throne, each step echoing through the chamber. As he came closer, Jake realized just how physically imposing the Zephyrian ruler was, but he also noticed something else: uncertainty in those large, dark eyes. In 2,000 years of imperial rule, no species has ever requested equality, the Overlord said. No being has ever suggested that imperial law requires change. Your very existence challenges everything we have built. Amanda looked around, the chamber at the thousands of watching beings. Maybe that's because no one ever thought they had permission to ask. Permission is not required for submission. Fear ensures order. But is order really worth it if everyone is miserable? Lisa asked. The question seemed to genuinely puzzle the Supreme Overlord. He looked around at his subjects as if seeing them for the first time. Many of them were standing straighter than usual, watching the conversation with obvious interest instead of the usual submissive terror. You have created disruption throughout our fleet, the Overlord said, turning back to the humans. Reports indicate that productivity has increased in some areas, but traditional discipline has decreased. Beings are asking questions that threaten imperial stability. Good questions or bad questions, Jake asked. There are no good questions about imperial order. Order simply is. Ryan shook his head. That's not really an answer. The Supreme Overlord began pacing in front of them, his massive form intimidating despite his apparent confusion. Your species presents an impossible choice. You cannot be conquered because you show no fear. You cannot be ignored because your ideas spread like infection. You cannot be reasoned with because you believe in impossible concepts. Like dignity? Amanda asked. Like equality, the Overlord replied. Like choice, like cooperation instead of domination. Jake stepped forward. Those aren't impossible concepts. They're just different from what you're used to. Different is dangerous, different leads to chaos, different leads to growth, Lisa countered. To improvement, to better solutions. The Supreme Overlord stopped pacing and stared at them. Around the chamber, Jake could see alien beings leaning forward to listen, many of them no longer showing the submissive postures that seemed required. If I accept your concepts, the Overlord said slowly, the Empire as it exists would end. Would that be so bad? Jake asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Supreme Overlord Vexthal looked around at his subjects, many of whom were now watching him with expressions he had probably never seen before. Not fear, but hope. You ask me to destroy 2,000 years of imperial achievement. We ask you to build something better, Amanda said. Together. The Overlord was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, less commanding, more uncertain. I must consider this. You will be detained while I decide how to proceed. As guards moved to escort them away, Jake noticed something important. Throughout the vast throne room, beings of dozens of species were talking quietly among themselves. For the first time in imperial history, the subjects were not immediately dispersing in fear. Change had already begun, whether the Supreme Overlord wanted it or not. The detention facility on Zephyros Prime was nothing like a human prison. The cells were spacious and comfortable, designed more for isolation than punishment. Captain Jake Morrison and his crew had been separated but could communicate through the room's systems, which seemed to be monitored but not restricted. This is weird, Ryan Brooks said through the communication link. They're treating us like dangerous criminals and honored guests at the same time. Dr. Amanda Pierce was in the adjacent cell, studying the facility's design through her small window. I think they don't know what to do with us. We don't fit into any category they understand. Lisa Carter's voice came through clearly from her cell. Have you been watching the news feeds? Something's happening out there. Jake had been monitoring the Imperial communication network since their arrival. What he saw was unprecedented in the Empire's history. Across dozens of worlds, beings were asking questions about dignity, equality, and choice. Some were refusing traditional submission gestures. Others were requesting better treatment or working conditions. It's spreading faster than anyone expected, Jake observed. The idea that different doesn't mean lesser is catching on. Their isolation ended abruptly when Admiral Kethvar arrived at Jake's cell, looking more troubled than they had ever seen him. The Zephyrian officer dismissed the guards and entered the cell alone. "I bring news from the Supreme Overlord," he said without preamble. "A decision has been reached regarding your species and your homeworld." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of decision?" "The Overlord has concluded that humanity represents an existential threat to Imperial order. A battle fleet has been assembled to locate and destroy your homeworld as an example to other species." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Earth, with its billions of innocent people, was going to be destroyed because 4 humans had refused to bow down to an alien dictator. "When?" Jake asked quietly. "The fleet departs in 6 hours. Earth's location will be determined from your ship's navigation systems." Jake looked up at the Admiral, searching for any sign of hope in those large, dark eyes. "And us? You will be executed publicly to demonstrate the fate of those who challenge Imperial authority." Admiral Kethvar turned to leave, then stopped. "I wanted you to know that I argued against this decision. Your species has shown me things I did not know were possible. But the Overlord fears that your ideas will destroy everything we have built." "Maybe they should," Jake said softly. The Admiral looked back at him. "Perhaps, but I am sworn to serve the Empire." After Kethvar left, Jake contacted his crew through the communication system. "You all heard that?" "Yeah, Captain," Lisa replied, her voice tight. "So what do we do?" Jake thought for a moment. They were imprisoned on an alien world, 40,000 light-years from home, facing execution while their planet was about to be destroyed. By any rational measure, they were completely helpless. "We do what humans do," Jake said finally. "We don't give up." The facility's communication system could reach the entire planetary network if Jake could figure out how to access it. It took him several hours of careful work, but eventually he managed to break through the security protocols. Ryan had taught him a few things about alien computer systems during their time aboard Admiral Kethvar's ship. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of Earth, speaking to all beings within the Galactic Empire," he began, broadcasting on every available frequency. "In 6 hours, an Imperial fleet will leave to destroy my homeworld. Billions of innocent people will die because 4 humans refused to kneel to your Supreme Overlord." The response was immediate. Alarms began sounding throughout the detention facility as Imperial security tried to cut off the broadcast, but Jake had routed it through too many systems to stop quickly. "I want you to know what humans believe," Jake continued. "We believe every thinking being has value. We believe strength should protect others, not dominate them. We believe cooperation creates more than conquest. We believe different doesn't mean lesser, it just means different." Through his cell window, Jake could see crowds gathering in the streets below. Beings from dozens of species were stopping their daily activities to listen. "The Supreme Overlord says these ideas are dangerous to his empire." Maybe they are. Maybe an empire built on fear and submission can't survive when people stop being afraid. But that doesn't make the ideas wrong. That just makes the empire wrong. Imperial guards were pounding on his cell door now, but the security locks were designed to keep people in, not out. It would take them time to override the systems. "Don't know what will happen to Earth. I don't know what will happen to us, but I know that some things are worth standing up for, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." The broadcast was suddenly cut off as Imperial technicians finally found the right systems to disable. But Jake could see through his window that the message had been heard. The crowds in the streets were no longer dispersing when Imperial security arrived. Instead, they were growing larger. Hours passed before Supreme Overlord Vexthul himself arrived at the detention facility. The massive Zephyrian ruler entered Jake's cell flanked by guards, his expression unreadable. "Your broadcast has created chaos throughout the Empire," he said without greeting. "Good," Jake replied simply. 17 worlds have reported civil unrest. Productivity has fallen across multiple sectors. Some species are openly refusing Imperial directives. Jake stood, up from his cell's chair, looking up at the towering alien ruler. Sounds like your people are finally standing up for themselves. They are destroying order that has lasted 2,000 years. They're choosing dignity over fear. That's not destruction. That's growth. The Supreme Overlord was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake with those large, dark eyes. Do you truly believe your concepts can work on a galactic scale? I believe they're worth trying. What you have now isn't really working anyway. It's just maintaining itself through fear. And if I cancel the attack on your homeworld, if I release you and your crew, the unrest will continue. The Empire may not survive. Jake looked directly into the alien ruler's eyes. Maybe the Empire doesn't deserve to survive, but the people in it do. All of them. They deserve something better. Something built on your human concepts of equality and cooperation. Something built on the idea that everyone matters. That everyone deserves basic dignity and respect. That different species can work together instead of some dominating others. The Supreme Overlord turned and walked to the cell's window, looking out at the crowds that had gathered below. They are no longer afraid, he observed. Fear was never the only option, Jake said. It was just easier than building something better. When the Overlord turned back, his expression had changed. The fleet to your homeworld has been recalled. You and your crew will be released. Jake felt relief flood through him. Thank you. Do not thank me. I am not doing this from kindness. I am doing it because the alternative is watching the Empire tear itself apart. Perhaps your way will lead to something better. Perhaps it will lead to chaos. But the current path leads only to stagnation. As they left the detention facility, Jake and his crew found themselves surrounded by crowds of aliens from dozens of species. But instead of the fearful, submissive beings they had seen before, these people stood tall and looked them in the eyes. A small, furry alien that Jake recognized from Admiral Kethvar's ship approached them. Thank you, she said in heavily accented English. Thank you for teaching us to stand up. Dr. Amanda Pierce knelt down to the alien's level. You don't need to thank us. You were always capable of standing up. You just needed to remember that you could. Admiral Kethvar met them at their ship, which had been repaired and refueled. The Supreme Overlord has agreed to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth, he reported. I have been assigned as the first Imperial ambassador to your species, Ryan grinned. Think you can handle working with equals instead of subjects? The Admiral's expression was thoughtful. I believe I am looking forward to learning. As the UES Wanderer prepared to depart Zephyros Prime, Jake looked back at the Imperial capital. Throughout the massive city, he could see changes already beginning. Beings of different species were talking together as equals. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the Empire for 2 millennia was starting to crack. Think it will work? Lisa asked as they entered hyperspace, finally heading home. Jake watched the stars shift around them. I don't know. Building something better is always harder than maintaining something that already exists. But they're willing to try, and that's what matters. What do we tell Earth when we get back? Amanda asked. Jake smiled. We tell them we found an entire galaxy out there, full of people who were waiting for someone to remind them how to stand up straight. The journey home would take weeks, but Jake wasn't worried about the time. They had a story to tell that would change humanity's place in the universe forever. They had gone out as explorers and come back as inadvertent revolutionaries. Not bad for 4 humans who had simply refused to kneel